Thank you. Hello. AI is fun and sexy, and everyone gets all hyped up about it. And I'm here to say fun's over. Now we have to get real. And I'm going to talk about the clinical validation and regulation of AI. This stuff always gets thought about last, which is why I'm probably the last speaker of this session or this afternoon, before the headline at the end. But I do want to impress on you that you guys have chosen the right session to come to, because we're going to talk about stuff that matters more importantly than any of the hype or any of the other things that are being mentioned today. Because if you want to use AI in a clinical setting in Europe, you need this, which is a CE mark, which is a French acronym for Conformité Européenne. If you don't have this, everything that everyone has been speaking about today, it's not possible. You can't use it on patients. All of these sponsors, well, the ones who are building medical devices, will be going towards this or will already have it. I know Chiron have it because I used to be the clinical director there. When you start thinking about CE marking, most people go, well, I don't know what that means, and they Google it. And they start on the left with a little search, and I purposely made this very complicated to prove a point. You start with the search, what's the CE mark, and you follow some documentation, and you quickly end up going down a massive rabbit hole of bureaucracy, international standards, and all sorts of methodologies for maintaining quality, risk assessments, and clinical investigation brochures, and all these kind of things. And you end up with 358 pages of European Commission-derived regulatory stuff to read through. So I'm here to make it a little bit more fun, hopefully. Here's how it all works. The regulatory infrastructure for Europe, and I know that we are post-Brexit, but we are technically still in Europe for this. The European Commission sets the EU MDR, the Medical Device Regulations. Now, you may have heard about the Medical Device Regulations, you may not. These are new, and in fact, they don't come into force until May this year. The previous version was called the Medical Device Directive. So if you hear people talking about MDD, tell them they're out of date. Now, the European Medical Device Directives cover the whole of Europe and all its member states, plus Britain in our kind of quasi-post-Brexit state. Now, the MHRA is the governing body in the UK who oversees medical devices. And then they tell notified bodies who are registered for-profit companies who are accredited to be auditors to go and sell their services to all the vendors who are making AI, and these are the guys who actually have to do all of the dog's body work and prove to the notified bodies, who can then tell the MHRA, who can then tell the EU Commission that this vendor is now safe to sell their stuff. So, who needs to get CE marked? If you are building medical device software, MDSW, and it is intended to be used, this is the very important phrase, what do you intend it to do? If it's alone or in combination, blah, 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 then it applies. And this is the really broad and vague definition that you'll find on page 63 of medical device regulations. And I'm not going to read it out for you. But if you intend to do any of these things with a bit of software, and that's any kind of AI software, it doesn't matter if it's deep learning or linear regression or whatever, you are likely to be a medical device and you will need a CE mark. So, how do you figure out, am I a medical device and do I need the CE mark? There's a very simple three-stage question that you have to ask yourself. Let's use the previous speaker as an example. He's got AI in an ultrasound probe. Is the software an accessory for a medical device, or does it drive or influence the use of a hardware medical device? Well, clearly it drives or influences the use of a hardware device, the ultrasound probe. So it's yes. Does it perform an action on data beyond that of just simple storage or archiving it? Yes, it does. It's presenting data to a doctor for the purposes of clinical diagnosis. And does it benefit individual patients? Yes. Therefore, the previous speaker, his company is building a medical device, and he mentioned he's going for FDA clearance, so he's aware of that already. So that's how you find out if you're a medical device. You're not a medical device if you're trying to build something for your A&E department to try and predict what the load of patients might be coming in at 2 a.m. every Saturday. That doesn't benefit individual patients, and it doesn't drive a hardware device, and it doesn't really go beyond data archive, storage, or search. So it's not a medical device. But it's not as simple as that. Clearly, different devices, depending on what they're intended to do, have a different level of risk. And the medical device regulation splits this into 3 risk categories. 1, 2, and 3. And this defines what you need to do in order to get your CE marking. The lower risk devices need slightly less regulation and bureaucracy and paperwork than the super high risk devices. So I'll give you an example of the extremes. So the lowest risk device that has got a Class 1 CE mark is a wooden tongue depressor. The highest risk device is a PET MRI scanner, because it's massive, metal objects can kill you if they come near it, it emits radiation, it can blow up, etc., etc. If you are anything but a wooden tongue depressor, you will need to register with a notified body. So remember that I showed you that the notified bodies are these for-profit companies who help you with your regulatory documentation and audit your company. If you are less than class 1 and non-sterile, then you don't need a notified body. How do you figure out what risk class you're in? Well, it all boils down to that intended use. And the intended use is deliberately vague in the medical device regulations because they can't be prescriptive for every single possible future invention that every single person in healthcare ever comes up with. It's up to you to decide what your intended use is. And you have to be really specific with your intended use. You have to say, this device is going to treat patients of this gender, of this demographic, of this ethnic race, of this particular disease after they've already had this treatment. It has to be really specific. You can't go, I'm going to build a device that can be used for everybody. Because if you want to do that, you then have to prove it works on everybody, which is impossible to do. So you have to try and narrow your intended use down and figure out what risk class it is. Now, most AI devices that are used for clinical decision support, i.e. presenting more information or processed information to a qualified healthcare professional, will be in Class 2. But Class 2 is split into 2 risk classes, A and B. And it depends on whether you're going to be making decisions with diagnosis that affect serious diseases and what the potential risks and harms are. So if you go down the left-hand side, so are you going to be diagnosed with something? Yes. Can it cause serious deterioration or surgical intervention? Then it's a 2B. So this might be cancer patients. If you're trying to diagnose stage 3 melanoma with your skin analytic thing, you might be a 2B device. Can it cause death or irreversible deterioration? Very unlikely that clinical decision support software will cause death. I'm not aware of any Class 3 AI devices out there. As Shakespeare once put it, to be or not to be. This is the only joke you can make about medical device regulations, by the way. And I get a lot of companies coming to me saying, Hugh, I don't know what risk class I am. How do you do? And it's like a 5-minute decision thing. You look at this table and you try to figure out where you are, okay? It really depends on the level of probability of something happening and what the maximum level of severity of the worst possible outcome being. And that's what risk class you go into. Right. The people who made the regulations are some of the most intelligent but anal people you'll ever meet. And they named all of the ISO standards, the International Standards Organization, they named all of their standards, all 10,482 of them, with 5-digit numbers. So, and I don't know how they decided which number, but here we go. I'm going to tell you the 4 that you need to know. And if you ever want to sound like you know what you're doing and you get approached by an AI vendor, you go, oh, have you got 13485 signed off? And they'll panic for a minute. They go, have we got that? I don't know. Because you know what this number means now. 13485 is a quality management system. I'm going to explain more about this. This is the crucial one. Every single AI vendor in the world has to have this signed off. Security management. If you're dealing with patient data, which most AI in clinical healthcare is, you will need to have 27001 signed off. If you're building software, software is not just let's start and then let's finish. It's a continuous cycle as you update and you maintain. So there's a software like a process system that you need to abide by. And then finally, you need to do a risk management, 14971. Such an exciting title. I don't know all of the numbers off by heart, but these are the main 4 that you need to do. There's a couple of new ones that you need to look into, 82304, just in case people at the Mac are interested in taking notes. So what is 13485 quality management systems? Even Google haven't got this yet. So there you go. You know something about 13485 that no one else does. It's a quality management system. It's a culture of your organization to say, we are going to document everything that we do to build, design, test, validate our software, and we're going to document it in a system that is fully traceable so that an external auditor can come in and say, I see exactly what you did and where. And you need to do this for every single device that has a CE mark, not just medical devices. That chair will have a CE mark. These light bulbs will have a CE mark. So every single manufacturer of any component in Europe will have a quality management system. These aren't just for medical devices. You will have to document your product lifecycle, your quality safety. Here's a couple of acronyms I'm going to briefly touch on. UDI is a unique device identifier. So with software, every time you iterate your software from version 1 to 1.1, then that creates a new unique device identifier. And then you need to comply with some general safety performance requirements, which I'm not going to bore you with. Then a clinical evaluation report. I'll get onto that. That's the exciting part. And then once it's deployed and live, and people are using it in a hospital or a GP practice, you need to do post-market surveillance and a periodic safety update report. Very simple stuff. So what does a quality management system look like? People go, oh, I can't think what it looks like. It's literally just a database of everything you've done. And anyone who's done any software engineering or coding will know what it's kind of like a Kanban board style thing. This is an EQMS, as it's known. You can use bits of paper if you're really old school. But you just, it's a little sort of web-driven, GUI-based thing where your engineers and your quality management responsible officer in your company will help fill in a document. And you click on things and you can add things. And what it means is that every single person and every single time you iterate and update this, it can be traced and audited, so you know who made what decision where. If your intern, Dave, copied some code off GitHub somewhere else and put it into your system and documented it, and then 3 years later down the line you find that that line of code is causing the bug, you know that it was Dave's fault, and you can trace the whole thing back. If you're called Dave, I'm sorry. That's not what I meant. You have to do a risk assessment. Anyone who's ever written an academic grant will kind of know what a risk assessment matrix looks like. You just divvy it up between the probability and the severity of risk. And now clinical evaluation. I'm an ex-radiologist, and I spent some years in academia, so clinical evaluation is what I love to do. I'm also an editor at Nature Digital Medicine, so I see a lot of these clinical evaluation of AI papers coming through, and a lot of people don't do it right. In regulatory speak, a clinical evaluation is not just a trial or study that you do. The clinical evaluation is the sum of all the parts, which is why the Venn diagram completely overlaps. It's a sum of clinical data, which could be what you've produced or what other people have produced, so you can do a literature review to prove that you're equivalent to someone else. Then your clinical trial and investigation, and your post-market and clinical follow-up data. And all of that forms a clinical evaluation report, or CER. So there's a lot of documentation to do, and this has to be updated yearly and resubmitted back into your QMS. I'm not going to read all of this to you. I hate it when people just read out slides to people. But I will point out that you have to do all of these processes before you get your CE mark. So sometimes there's a chicken and egg situation when an AI company goes to a hospital and says, we want to do a validation study, and they go, have you got the CE mark? You go, no, this is a validation study to get our CE mark. And sometimes there can be tensions in those conversations. Here are some of the phases of studies that you might want to go through to complete your clinical evaluation report. You might want to start at phase 1, do a feasibility study, get 200 X-rays of something and run a simple model over it just to see if it's even possible to do the thing that you think it might be able to do. You might want to publish those results. There's no mandate, to publish any of your results from your CE marking process. Some people think that's bad. Industry thinks that's good because they like to maintain their secrets. Then you can do efficacy studies, test things in a controlled environment, so that might be getting a validation data set from elsewhere, running your algorithm in this kind of siloed, clean data set. Then there's effectiveness. You might want to deploy it in a specific clinical location and see how it actually works in the real world. And then phase 4 is your post-market and follow-up. It's only after phase 3, really, that you should be submitting your clinical evaluation reports. Do I need to do a clinical investigation? Not necessarily. You only are absolutely mandated to do a clinical investigation if you are a Class 3 device. Clearly, you don't want to put people inside PET MRI scanners if they've never been tested. And it also only if you're a Class 2 device that's based on innovative technologies. Now, AI still counts as new. So every AI device still needs a clinical investigation. And if you have a new intended use that no one has ever before put on market, then you definitely need a clinical investigation because you won't be able to do a literature review or compare yourself to anybody else. So if you suddenly come up with a new idea that no one's ever thought of, you're not going to get to market that quickly because you still need to do all your studies. A couple of things to add. With the new regulations coming out in May, there's a European database called UDAMED, which is being introduced. This is kind of like if anyone's ever searched the FDA website. Hands up if you have. Nobody's ever searched 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, wow. You've searched the FDA website. There's no such thing like that for CE mark devices. You literally cannot find out who's got a CE mark. It's impossible. This is now going to come into force. It was meant to start in May, but the Europeans, they took a long summer holiday, and it's going to come out in 3 years. So there will eventually be a European database for medical devices. Now, all of you academics sitting there going, oh, this is really boring, I don't need to know any of this. Yes, you do. If you are building AI systems in your academic ivory tower, and you go, well, I'm going to roll this out because it's so good, you need to go through all the regulations too. You don't need to take the final step and have an external audit to get a CE mark. But you need a quality management system. You will need to have security and risk assessment documentation. And you will need to have your software lifecycle processes documented. If you're placing it on the market, i.e. there's an exchange of money, then you need to get a CE mark. If you're putting it into use, then you still need your quality management system. So I'm sorry, academics, your wonderful papers in Nature are never going to see light of day unless you start engaging with this kind of stuff. I'm not saying that this regulatory stuff is a perfect system. There are pros and cons. I like to always highlight this. It's nice that there's a database coming out, I think. We'll be able to search and see who got a CE mark. There's a much bigger increased focus on safety and follow-up. The previous medical device directives really didn't say much about the follow-up. But now, because we know that AI systems are going to improve over time as industry partners see more data and update their algorithms constantly, I think it's very important to have these periodic safety update reports. And these are globally standard methodologies. I say globally. There's only one country in the world that doesn't accept these standards, and that's America. They have the FDA, which likes to do things in their own entire way. If you have a QMS to 13485, you can go to market in every country around the world, apart from America. Cons. If you have a Class 1 or a Class 2A device, there's no transparency about your clinical evaluation. So you're trying to sell that to a hospital, you don't actually have to tell them what you did in your studies. Good luck trying to sell to a hospital that way, but you don't have to. There's no mandate for prospective studies. All of the clinical investigations can be retrospective, i.e. you collect some body of historic patient data and you run your algorithm on it. And that is fine for the regulation. So when companies come up to you going, yeah, we've got CE mark, it's fine, you can buy what we've got, ask them, have they done a prospective study? They won't have. There's only ever been 4 prospective studies ever, and they're all done in China, and they're all done on AI with endoscopy. So no one's done a prospective study in AI yet in the world for things that we actually care about. Lack of guidance on validation data quality. This is a minor niggle. Basically, there's no prescription of exactly what quality of data you should use in your retrospective studies. That's up to you. So you can kind of cheat a little bit if you are feeling a bit naughty. You could say, oh, I'm only going to get data I know my algorithm can work on. But the regulators are wising up to this, and several of the notified bodies will come in and do an independent assessment on the bias of your validation data set. Okay, I'm going to ask you some questions now. Do you think, if we can raise the lights just a little bit, because I can't quite see the audience, should all clinical evaluations of medical devices, so those that have to be done, should they be peer-reviewed? Should they publish in peer-reviewed papers? What do you think? Hands up if you think yes. All medical devices should have peer-reviewed, published evidence. Yes, that's very good. Hands up if you think no. Roughly the same. Hands up if you didn't put your hand up. Most of you, okay, fine. Good. So those who said yes, presumably you want to have more transparency and trust over these AI vendors, and those who said no might realize actually that it might not add anything to the scientific literature. If you're the 5th manufacturer to invent an ultrasound probe that can do cardiac stuff, then it's adding nothing to the scientific literature for you to publish your results. There's also intellectual property issues. don't underestimate how aggressive companies will be to keep their secrets safe. Should all academic institutions that are producing software, or AI software I should specify, become ISO 13485 compliant? You all know what 13485 is now. You didn't 15 minutes ago. Hands up if you think academic institutions building AI with the intent to use it eventually should get ISO 13485 compliance. Hands up. Great. And who thinks no, that's not worth the time or effort? Good. And hands up if you didn't put your hand up. Less of you. Good. All right. I agree with the audience. Yes, I think they probably should. I think it would foster innovation. It would definitely drive impact and speed up your time from bench to bedside, I think is the phrase. And some people say, no, I don't want to. I don't ever intend to make this available to my patients. It's just an academic thought exercise to see if I can actually build something. And I understand that as well. And that, I think, is the end. Thank you very much. You can contact me here, and if we have time, we'll take some questions. Thank you.
The bad news is you asked us the questions, so that used up the time. But the good news is we enjoyed your presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, please thank Dr. Hugh Harvey. Thank you.